Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aashti, and I am the founder and CEO of the Global Schools Forum, which is a network of mission-aligned education organizations across Asia, Africa, and South America, supporting the delivery of quality education to children from low-income families. I am absolutely delighted to be here with you today for a session called Better Together: Why and how governments are partnering with nonprofits. I'm joined today by three leaders who represent organizations that have been working tirelessly across India, Pakistan, Uganda, and Zambia to ensure access to quality education. To my left, I've got Zia Akhter Abbas, Executive Vice President at the Citizens Foundation. And joining me virtually is Jenny Groot, who's the acting CEO of PPPs, and Shaveta Sharma-Kukreja, who is the Managing Director of the Central Square Foundation. Thank you to the three of you for being here today and joining me today. Yesterday, we heard from Minister Senge as he provided the keynote address on the Global Education Monitoring Report, encouraging governments to create spaces and set conditions for a variety of actors to interact, coordinate, and collaborate. Is there a bit of a... He added that partnerships with the non-state sector can help mobilize resources and expertise across the board and encourage initiatives that can fast forward progress at a pace that governments may be unlikely to achieve on their own. In this session, we're going to share how our panelists and the organizations that they represent are working together in a myriad of ways to fast forward progress and complement efforts of the governments in which they operate in a range of ways. The two overarching issues that I would love to unpack today with you here are firstly, how we can capture and understand the diversity of partnerships between the state and the non-state. Perhaps most importantly, if we expand the notion of public-private partnerships to actually look at partnerships for public purpose, what are some of the key features of a truly value-adding PPP in this new construct that can transform education systems to deliver quality education at scale for all children? So before I go into the questions for the panelists, given the many different ways that non-state actors are partnering with government, I thought it might be helpful to just lay out a couple of key ways and some shared language that we can use in the conversation today. So, non-state actors are partnering with government to deliver education. These are more formal PPPs and also more community school type of arrangements. Non-state actors are also supporting system strengthening and reform, as well as engaging in policy reform and in the delivery of ancillary services. So keeping those four constructs in mind, let me start with Citizens Foundation. So TCF partners with the government to deliver education. You also, I understand, partner with government around a myriad of policy engagement issues, and finally, are also engaging in the delivery of ancillary services. So let's think about those and use that as we move through the discussion. Peas and Jenny, from what I understand, you are supporting the Ugandan and the Zambian governments in some system strengthening partnerships, and you are also involved in the delivery of secondary education, including the construction of buildings as well as managing schools. And finally, Central Square Foundation and Shaveta are involved quite deeply with 12 Indian states in system strengthening efforts. Let me kick off, Zia, if you can just unpack those three different ways that you are currently supporting the Pakistani government across the provinces in which TCF operates.
Thank you so much, Aashti, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a great honor to be here. Sometimes learning about what forms public-private partnership takes is an important catalyst to imagining such forms in your own context. So TCF, or the Citizens Foundation in Pakistan, works with the governments in many ways. First of all, we work with them on delivery. So we run schools in partnership with the government. This includes schools which are owned by the government and operated by us through some of our staff as well as government staff, but always with some subsidy from the government. But it also includes schools which we establish, and then the government supports through subsidies and other efforts and oversees the quality of education as well. Beyond delivery, we work very closely with multiple governments, that means provincial governments, on technical advice, assistance, and policy formulation. So this could include everything from figuring out how to assess children, how to make language of instruction policies, how to develop and refine the curriculum that is being taught. And it gets as logistical and as detailed in terms of assistance as helping states write books and review their textbooks, or even design the instructional sort of classroom design for multi-grade teaching. Underlying all of this, you have to kind of become a trusted advisor. So sometimes there is no program, there is no contract, but you have to be a phone call away from a minister, a secretary, or someone who's working to try and solve a programmatic challenge. And sometimes you're just giving knowledgeable and well-intentioned advice.
Thank you so much. Let me turn over to Jenny.
Thanks, Aashti. So he's also worked for the government in a couple of different ways. So, as we said, delivery partnerships, we do low-cost, rural, high-quality secondary schools. And we do that in locations that are most important. But then we use those schools as centralized marginalized students, especially girls. And we use those schools to design. Like that's slightly different to how Zaidi say. Expertise is going to our strength side and more about how we see ourselves as experts in making individuals who are in government, and so the most important for us is for us to deliver that.
Jenny, your voice is going in and out. I'm not sure if it's a technical issue, but maybe if you could try just turning your volume up. Let me hand over to Shaveta, and then hopefully we can hear you better. Don't want to miss out what you have to say, Jenny. Shaveta, over to you.
Hey, hi, Aashti. Am I audible? Is it clear? Okay, great. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Aashti. So from the perspective of how we work with the government, Central Square Foundation is today partnering with 12 states in India with a very sharp focus on early learning. In fact, our government engagement, because education is on the concurrent list in India, we work both with central government agencies. Today, the country has an early learning mission, Nipun Bharat, which has come from the Ministry of Education centrally. And we are partnering with 12 state governments. State is at the center of our system reform approach, because both from a policy and a funding perspective, as well as the technical solution which needs to be embedded and institutionalized within the government system, the primary stakeholder becomes the state government to ensure diagnostic design and operationalizing with fidelity the solution which can then reach to scale and be sustainable by government funding.
Thanks, Shaveta. In fact, let me just ask you an add-on question over there, just building on.
Sorry, Aashti, you're muted on the. We can't hear your question. Sorry, I think it's the Teams mute.
No, yours is fine.
You can hear me? Yeah. Shaveta, just building on what you just said,
Aashti, we still can't hear you.
We need the person on the Teams chat to unmute it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Apologies for all the tech issues. Shaveta, I was just really keen to understand, based on what you just said, whether this engagement with government has been sort of central to the approach that Central Square Foundation has always taken, or is it something that's evolved over time? And if you could just comment on sort of where that partnership started and how it might have grown or developed. And then I'd love for Jenny to take that question after you.
Sure. So, Aashti, in the Indian context, education is and always will be a social good. The government is not just the regulator and doesn't really set up the policy, but in India, the largest education service provider is government itself. Government sets up the policies, owns schools, and runs schools. So, in our life cycle, government has always been a very important stakeholder. But I think we've also learned our ways of working in engagement with the government over our last 10-year journey. It started with more advisory engagement where, exemplar from our grant portfolio, from our research and from our learnings is what we wanted to go and have good government meetings with. And somewhere we were naive enough to say that the see-through will come only from governmental role. To now, and even for us organizationally, when we started looking at it not just from a policy engagement perspective, but a system reform perspective, I think that to me was a pivot in the evolution where now the government engagement starts with policy. However, it goes to co-creating the design and equally importantly, seeing through the implementation. So typically in our social sector parlance, when we use the I do, we do, you do model, right? In India's we have a lot of successful I do pilots with exemplary results. Today, our articulation is our starting point of government engagement is in a we do model. We are in this journey together. We are co-creating. We are designing. Everything critical is brought to the table, and decisions are made. Not all decisions, and decisions have to be optimized for the context in which we are operating. And so our portfolio of 12 states will also follow its own journey of adoption and success. But the clear mandate is we are starting at we do so that we transition to a you do, where we help support the government to be able to deliver it to scale in a sustainable manner. So that's been our evolution with the government. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks, Shaveta. Can you hear me this time, Aashti?
Clear.
Great. So I guess from Peace perspective, right from the start, when we started back in 2008 in Uganda, we were committed to working with government and wanted to make sure we could make that partnership work so that our impact could be at scale. But I think it's fair to say the partnership itself has evolved quite a lot over time. So to start with, it was very much a delivery partnership, responding to the government's needs for us to construct schools in areas where they just didn't have the budget to focus, and where other private providers, local private providers, weren't able to do that because those areas were incredibly poor and students weren't able to pay the kind of fees where someone could make a surplus on the school. So it was really important that there was some kind of non-profit actor to reach those most marginalised areas. And then slowly over time, the government partnerships have evolved as government's been more open to partnering with these. And I think those come through three main reasons. Firstly, because we now have evidence of that have evidence of poor types yet.
Jenny, we're losing you again. I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay. Have an idea. Okay, I'm hoping you can hear me now. I've turned your volume off, so I can't hear you anymore. I'll turn it back on. So three main things. Firstly, we've got like the evidence of impact, as I was saying. We know our students are poorer. We know they start further behind than other students, and we know they catch others up. And that's a really powerful thing for us to take to government to help show them that we can solve some of the challenges they're facing in rural areas. The second is that we're committed to long term. So we've been in Uganda since 2008 and in Zambia since 2011. We're not going anywhere. We're committed to working in the places we work, and our teams are wholly Ugandan, wholly Zambian on the ground. And that makes a huge difference to the amount of trust we have from government. And thirdly, like that we are prepared to respond to government priorities. Our partnership has evolved over time, and it's not just been Peas banging a drum of doing everything that we've always wanted to do. What we've said to government, as governments have come and gone as well, is that we want to help them deliver the priorities that they have, that their people have. And I think that's what's enabled us to really start to catalyse change at the system level. You know, we know that what we want to do is deliver inclusive, quality secondary education. And as long as our partnerships with government let us do that, we're prepared to be responsive and fit in with what government wants to do best.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think what I'm hearing from both of you is really interesting. Shaveta, you jumped in on kind of, I love the journey around we do and then you do. And Jenny, what you're talking about is really that long-term patience and commitment to work alongside government and develop that trust. Zia, can you comment a little bit about how your relationship with government has evolved over time?
Sure. So we frankly started with a very much a focus on us operating our own schools, and really beyond, after building 1,000 school units, the organization went into a very conscious reflection on how we can magnify our impact, and partnering with the government was a logical next step. But we frankly, 5 years ago when we started this journey, didn't really understand that we would have so much in terms of arenas of impact, and as well as the levels of reach that we could achieve through working with the government.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick up, Jenny, on what you said a little while ago around evidence. Can you talk a little bit about how PEAS has kind of used evidence and the evidence of your impact through your engagements with governments to jointly partner with government?
Yeah, sure, Aashti. So I guess we think about evidence in two separate pieces. The first is we've been running these exemplar schools since 2008, and evidence is how we've been able to kind of hone our approach and learn what's working, but also to demonstrate that it works so that we get buy-in from the stakeholders at different levels of government, most importantly from the school leaders themselves, because being able to demonstrate that our schools are having an impact in those challenging circumstances is one of the things that really kind of lets us in and lets us have impact at a government level. So that's a big part of our evidence, and that's obviously incorporated into our systems internally, but also externally with partners that help us see objectively whether we are having the impact and what part of our program is having the biggest impact, which is really important for us. Because the second piece, as I said, is to then work with government to incorporate parts of the PEAS approach into their model. And we want to make sure that we're incorporating the parts that make the biggest difference. Government doesn't have an enormous budget, so enabling them to focus increased activity on areas that are going to make the biggest difference to student outcomes, either on the inclusion side or on the quality of outcome side, is really important for us. So as we adapt and implement and then scale any partnership with government, monitoring and evaluation is absolutely critical. Also just ethically, because we think firstly that anything government does, they should be evaluating the impact of how they're spending that money, but also because integrating the monitoring and evaluation into the government program allows us to do that in a way that isn't increasing workload for already hugely overburdened school leaders and teachers. So thinking ahead about how the evidence can be gathered in a streamlined way is a really important part of making the program scalable and sustainable, and something that leaders and teachers actually want to come to their schools. So yeah, for us, getting that external eye so that government believes us is important, but more than anything, helping government build in the ongoing monitoring so that what they're developing with us, and then hopefully one day without us, is continuing to have that focus on delivering outcomes.
That's brilliant. So that again it echoes back to Shaveta's comment around we do and you do. Shaveta, from Central Square Foundation's perspective then, can you talk us through a little bit about how you are building evidence of impact through these kind of arrangements and deep relationships that you have across multiple states in India?
Aashti, just building on Jenny's point of how orientation to evaluation becomes central to, I think, in whatever the heterogeneity of approach we take, that becomes central to how any CSO or NGO or foundation aims to work with the government. In our case, specifically how we are engaging on our early learning system reform, there is existing evidence of what the technical partners have already achieved in pilots. And our hypothesis is they don't have to necessarily have achieved it even within the same state. If there's evidence from within India of a pilot, that's almost the qualifying criteria to be a part of this coalition with the government. It's also what helps establish credibility with the government. We are not talking international examples, we are talking examples from within the country. Specifically in the design of our early learning mission, both at a central government level and at a state government level, as a part of the design document and perspective planning, assessment, monitoring, and evaluation has been called out as one of the most critical pillars. And it's not because an NGO wants to see the data or want to report it back to the research community or to the donor, but for the government system to start engaging with data for decision making. What is the step in that design journey, pedagogical journey, or learning journey where there is a gap? How do we identify it early enough so that we are not leaning on a year-end remediation, right? How do you course correct as a system? And because the system by default is the one that influences all stakeholders, whether it's the teacher, whether it's the academic institutions. So I think the centrality of assessment, monitoring, and evaluation, not high stake for the student, but high stake for the system to take corrective action. And also, it does bring energy when the learnings are being reported back at a central government level. There's learnings to be had from other states. I might be getting a part of the solution right, whereas another state might be struggling with an issue, and that also lends itself to a very rich cross-learning environment.
Thanks so much, Shaveta. So it's as much about building the systems as it is about providing exemplars for success that can potentially be scaled up. Zia, I wondered if you wanted to comment on this, or indeed around the question of sustainability in a long term, because I know that potentially one of the criticisms around non-state partnerships is this big question around sustainability. What happens when you do exit, or what happens to scale when you think about kind of a non-state partner moving out of that arrangement that they might have with government?
Absolutely. So I remember a situation where I was sitting in front of a minister of education, and he asked me this question: what happens 10, 20 years down the road? The minister is not in that position anymore, but we are still managing his schools, and really that is part of the learning that came out of our few years of experience. Sometimes the results of what you learn from the ground are very counterintuitive. So we have some programs where we have 10-year-long, fairly fixed contracts, and others where our contracts are 2 to 3 years, and there are really sort of very flexible contracts. And one feels that, the longer term contracts would be more sustainable, but in an environment which is constantly changing and difficult to predict, where costs and even academic challenges that you're trying to solve on the ground are going to completely change over time, sometimes the flexible contracts are actually more sustainable. And being fixed or straight-jacketed into a very inflexible arrangement can be less sustainable. We have had situations where we and other partners have been the institutional memory of programs, while the government functionaries and folks have changed over time. So sometimes sustainability and solutions around sustainability are very counterintuitive. And we believe that the way to solve for this is to assume that you are going to operate these schools on an ongoing basis until the government one day captures or develops the capability to be able to do the same amount of work or same level of work and create the same outcomes. And until then, to invest in infrastructure, professional development, and all the other things that take a great school and a great system, to continue doing that as if you were going to do it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I wonder, sort of, for the audience here today, and for those that are joining us virtually, given that the three of you have been, your partnerships have evolved over time, you obviously have the trust and the partnership of governments in the countries or the states in which you operate. What advice would you have for other organizations, potentially younger than you, that are thinking about partnering with government? What are some of the ways, what kinds of organizations are more suited to partner with government in the ways that you do? Let me kick it to you, Zia, and then
Sure.
I'll ask
Sure.
Jenny and Shaveta.
There's a whole bunch of things that I wish people had told me 5 years ago when I was starting out in this journey. First of all, you have to remember that you have to be comfortable with ambiguity and the fact that this is going to be a bumpy road. Institutions are not strong in the countries where we work, so individuals make a lot of difference. And there is a massive turnover when it comes to the bureaucracy and civil servants, your key stakeholders. Every new person means a change in priorities and policies. And so you have to be able to pivot very quickly and remain focused and committed to the longer term goals that you came in with. Implanting behaviors and systems and rhythms into a school, I'm talking about delivery contracts especially, is a really complex and difficult task. So patience is really critical on the private operators' part, on the government's part, but also on the part of all other stakeholders. So we must remember this is not the government and private sector coming together to build a road. We are really trying to do something behaviorally for the long term. So, assessing the impact within a 12 or 18-month period, one really needs to question whether that is really the window of impact that one expects in a situation where it may take 12 months to just get control of the operation and stabilize them. I also think it's really important to manage the internal dynamics of your organization. So is the partnership program a priority for the critical support functions within the organization? Are you signing on to too many programs? Because each program brings in their own complexity and governance load. Finally, with all of this messy, unpredictable reality, we have seen that public-private partnerships unlock sources of revenue and sources of stakeholder support, which individually private partners and the government struggle to command or get. And that unlocking, that win-win situation is really the long-term promise of public-private partnerships.
Partnerships for public purpose. Let me ask Jenny, actually, do you want to jump in here and reflect on kind of what you might have learned and advice that you might have for other organizations that are thinking about embarking on partnerships with government?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I would certainly echo what Zia was just saying around patience. And then a couple of other things from us, like one, government is a multi-headed beast. Some departments are more open to working with non-state operators than others and more suited to it. So I think, for example, when Peas first started trying to work with government, we felt like, well, we're only secondary, scale secondary operators, we must work with the secondary department. But in fact, the secondary department wasn't really well suited to working with non-state operator just because of the structures within government in Uganda. And so one of the things we realized is actually what we're good at is working with schools on the ground and making things improve on the ground. And actually the department on the ground is the department responsible for quality assurance of all schools, primary and secondary. And so working with the secondary side of that department was actually a lot faster route to having impact than continuing to bang on the door of the secondary department. So I just say, to other organizations, think broadly about which bit of government is best suited to work with you and be prepared to be flexible to find a way in that works for that. And that, actually, once you do that, you have to help that department manage their own stakeholder relationships within government. So, now we still work with the secondary department, but we do that via the quality assurance department. And then the last thing is just thinking really honestly about where you can actually add value. You're not going to be able to wrap up the whole of quality education in a box. And if you do, then anyone who's a thinking decision maker in government isn't going to buy that box. So think about what is it that you can actually make a difference to, and be careful that you don't just add complexity to government, but actually add something that's improving student outcomes. I think often we get wrapped up in ourselves and our amazing ideas and what we can make work in a tiny microcosm of our small implementing program. And we owe it to government and the funders who support us to think really honestly about what can be translated to scale before we start taking that to governments and asking them to buy it.
Yeah, That is really, that makes me think a lot about CSF's approach. Shaveta, I wondered if you wanted to comment, both based on your experience, but also what you might have seen over your time at CSF as other partners engage with government.
So, I think basically I'll end up maybe re-summarizing or paraphrasing what Zia and Jenny have already shared, but I'd say three things. First and foremost is empathy and respect. I think it's very easy for us to sit in judgment of what works in the government, what doesn't work. There is transfers, there's bureaucracy, there's politics, there's power center. But especially I can say in the Indian context with all the constraints, the fact that the system works on a daily basis. Children come into school, teachers come into the classroom, and attempt for learning to happen on a daily basis is honestly a moment of awe. And I think it's important to remember that changing a system which has functioned in a certain way for 7 decades plus is a mammoth task. And you can't, COVID put a pause button to that system, but however, you're changing while you're on the fly. And I think that respect and empathy has to be central in how we engage with the government. The second, both Jenny and Zia spoke about commitment and patience. Change won't happen overnight. It's a slow burn exercise. Identify what are the milestones which will keep you as an organization energized along the way, but don't look for quick fix for celebration, right? It's a slow journey. Change will be hard, but it will be institutionalized when it starts landing. So it might land slow, but it's more permanent in that approach. And third is that work with the government as a key partner from day one. You're not there to tell them what to do, but almost you're at the same side of the table, whether you're diagnosing the extent of the problem, whether you're creating a new design, whether you're figuring out how to evaluate it, what the evidence and the learning agenda is, and commit to iterating and learning on the ground. Even the best design solution by experts, the deficiencies start getting exposed in the operationalizing of it. So a policy change with a good design is still the start of the journey. And that's where we are in CSF with our work on FLN under the Nipun Bharat campaign, both at a country and a state government level. All that design work still needs to be taken to our classrooms, to our teachers, to our children, to our parents, with an openness to iterate and strengthen it in the implementation. So respect and empathy, commitment and patience, in it together with the government, iterating till it starts working at scale.
Thanks, Shaveta. Those are really helpful tips. And you touched on COVID, so I wondered if I could ask one last question before potentially opening it up for questions, which is, as the three of you look ahead to the next couple of years, how has COVID changed the nature of partnerships? And what do you think the next couple of years will look like? Do you think change is going to be fast? Do you think change is going to be slow? And what do you think we're looking at? Zia, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think clearly we need to acknowledge that the path to universal primary and secondary education for some of the more developed countries is not necessarily going to be the path that all of us follow in each of our countries. There are realities on the ground, and governments' capacities, both financial and organizational, are challenged every day. So recognizing that and recognizing the role of partnership with the private sector, I think that recognition is going to grow. And the hope is that these partnerships will be the bridge to governments improving their own capacity and one day being able to provide at scale learning quality as well as equity on the ground. The important things that I would like to see is I would like to see less focus on procurement and more on partnership. It is very important to find partners who have the same intent for the long term. And we have to find those creative ways of being able to identify that and develop and grow those partnerships. And I also think that in the larger scheme of things, while COVID may have been a bump, the core realities of our systems remain unchanged. And the potential is really massive when we talk about what these partnerships can unlock for governments.
Thanks, Zia. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I guess, you mentioned COVID, Aashti. In Uganda and Zambia, before COVID, only 1 in 3 young people were going on to secondary school. And Uganda is just hopefully coming to the end of the longest school closures in the world. So we are really starting from a long way further back than we wanted to. Girls are even further behind. Governments have more to deliver than ever before. So I think, back to Shaveta's point around empathy and respect, these governments have a lot to deliver. And I think non-state partners need to be very respectful of that as we get started into 2022 and beyond, and really think about where they can add the most value. I think our view is the kind of biggest areas that non-state will be able to help over the next few years is, around innovative solutions, those that are hard to incubate in the government system, but can be developed by a non-state partner and then shared on with government for them to consider and potentially adapt and implement at scale. And then the other side is around the evidence piece and embedding learnings that kind of small scale pilots might be able to come up with, or bringing in experience from other contexts. As Shaveta said, whether that's from state to state in the same country, or whether for us that's from across different countries that face similar challenges. But I think, for me, the main thing for the future is that, we, like, non-state has a role to play, and we need people to focus on supporting that role to make sure that we are focused on expanding access, inclusivity and quality. For us, particularly at secondary, which feels like it's always left further behind, for those students that really need it most. I'm banging on the equity drum. I feel like all day, every day, especially during this conference. Like, we have to keep remembering that there are students at home with no devices, no internet access. The provision we have to focus on from PISA's perspective is helping those students get access to basic education, and not getting excited by shiny bells and whistles, but thinking about what are universal solutions to the students that are really being left behind now that hopefully we come out of the pandemic.
Thanks so much, Jenny, in particular for mentioning the equity question. Shaveta, from your perspective, what does it look like on the ground in the 12 states that you're operating in, and how has COVID kind of magnified or accelerated the work that you're doing, or potentially slowed it down? And what does the next couple of years look like for you?
I want to pick up the head on equity that Jenny emphasized. And especially for India as a country, we started taking pride in the fact that all our children are now coming to school, and we have to solve for the quality of learning. What COVID has unfortunately set us back on is kids are also dropping out of school, not just the low-fee private schools, but due to migration, due to displacement, due to socioeconomic compulsions. A big priority, which both, again, the government is already focusing on, is re-enrollment and bringing an equity lens to it. We all know from a gender perspective, the girl child is the one who gets pulled out sooner and is unlikely to find her way back into school. So re-enrollment to ensure all our children are back in school. And it's also, even before we talk about the learning journey, I think the social, emotional, mental toll that COVID has taken on these young children needs to be addressed by first getting them into a safe school environment, and just getting into the rhythm of, I can meet my friends, I can interact with a teacher, I am getting out of my school, out of my home. That rhythm needs to be reinstated. I think second, and we've made very good progress. A few state governments have been very engaging to say that we can't offset the school closure loss. And India has unfortunately ended up having the longest school closures. We were 18 months and counting. Now schools have opened, but with staggered attendance. So we haven't got stability yet. The solution cannot be a Band-Aid remediation program. Let's give respect to that learning loss which has happened. And when we design for building back better, the academic instruction design has to account for giving adequate time. A child who will, and our academic year starts in April, right? A kid entering grade 4 last came to school in grade 1. missed entire grade 2, had very limited in-school days on grade 3. How can we even aspire or aim or plan to start this child on her grade 4 journey? So due instruction design has to account for the COVID learning loss. That's the second point. I think there are two factors which COVID in a way enforced for the system to start responding to or engaging with than in a way better than they had done before has been digital and parents and community. On digital, I'm fully with Jenny that when we think digital, we have to keep in mind the equity lens. Unfortunately, digital ends up, the digital divide further shows up as deepening the learning divide. And what is relevant technology and how does that get integrated into the in-school program? Is a government-owned satellite TV channel a better way of reaching the community than only a WhatsApp-based instruction model? Personalized adaptive learning solutions have a lot of potential, but how do we design for all the children to have access to that, right? So I will call it relevant digital solutions which integrate the in-school learning. So, and hence is available to everyone. I think that's a forward-looking solution, and excited to see governments wanting to engage in it, accepting the limitations of digital, but knowing what forward-looking can be leveraged. And third, I think parent and community. I'm sure it's similar in most developing South, but especially the parent agency of a child who comes into a government school is very, very weak. I think with school closures, the government also realized that the need to leverage the parent and community as an enabler of education, not as a provider of education, but that enabling function where the home factor can start being more supportive to the child's learning journey is also where we are seeing good engagement, good discussions. And I do hope a more sustainable and equitable solution of digital and community helps us recover better from COVID and stronger.
Thank you so much, Shaveta. Zia, did you want to come in on that? I was thinking we could wrap up and then I'd love to see if the audience has any questions.
I would love to yield to the audience's question at this point. I think that'll be a great value add.
Amazing. And I hope that, what we were able to transmit and share with you was just the very sort of dynamic nature of the partnerships that these three organizations have developed, and just unboxing the very heterogeneous nature of these partnerships. Each one, looks quite different. But I think what we're trying to do is just really unpack what has traditionally been a bit of a misrepresentation around partnership as being interpreted as privatization. And as you've seen from both Central Square Foundation and TCF&P's engagement with government, there has been a long-term commitment, a real patience, a desire to respect and work alongside government with a real sense of empathy and patience. And these are enduring and evolving partnerships that I think we're hoping that will provide and lead to quality education for both basic and for both primary and secondary education. So with that, let me close out, and I'd love to take any questions from all of you, or any comments indeed. Thank you.
There's a mic.
A question for Zia.
Could you just quickly introduce yourself? Thanks.
Oh, my name is Nadia Naviwala. Zia, you referred to the idea of governments being able to unlock private capital through their partnerships with the private sector, which is an interesting idea because governments have so much more in terms of resources than the private sector does. So how does this work? Why is it a benefit to government to unlock private capital to improve the public sector?
So first of all, thank you, Nadia. First of all, the realization is that even with those massive budgets, there are constraints which are financial facing the government at any point. The kind of budgets we have may be allocated towards paying salaries for the bigger chunk of those, the funds available, and the amount of funds available for technical analysis, research, especially for building new infrastructure or for building new capabilities, is very scarce. So there is a real pressure on those funds. Coupled with that, the fact that there is a patchy track record for governments who have been able to get grants. Every region has its own sordid history. And so if private sector can bring in to build confidence at the execution level, and especially in some cases, even economies in execution, that builds a lot of will for funders, both individual foundations as well as governments, to fund a joint effort, a partnership, rather than an individually run program.
Any other questions?
Hello?
Yes.
Wow, that's loud.
Amazing.
I was just saying that there's some capabilities that private sector has, particularly telecommunications, for example, which have become really salient during the pandemic, like making educational content accessible at zero cost. I think the private sector can play a role in some of that. But Aashti, I'd love to ask, what can funders do to pave the path for some of these scale-ups of innovative solutions that are locked inside non-state actors that have the potential to make a big difference if rolled out through systems? How can funders actually make more of those journeys happen?
It's a great question. And it's actually a great segue, Simon, to something that we're hoping to do at the Global Schools Forum, which is to really work alongside non-state actors to test innovations that might reside within their own organizations that they think might have wider replicability, scalability, and relevance for both state and other non-state actors. So we're about to launch next year what we're calling the Impact at Scale Labs, where we will work alongside and provide sort of flexible funding to non-state actors, but with an ambition to work alongside government to both test and scale those pilots in partnership with government. Similar to what Shaveta said right at the beginning, I mean, I think with Central Square Foundation, they already work with partners that have some evidence of impact. What we're hoping to do is to really build on that evidence so that governments can have build those partnerships with non-state actors, understand what works and what doesn't work. And we'd love to know whether funders would be interested in engaging with that.
Can I just add to that? Funders, ironically, have potentially a disproportionate and positive impact on the process if they are the continuous thread running through a program while government functionaries may change and government priorities and politics may change those priorities as well. But sometimes another stakeholder on the table, ironically, because many times those are not local stakeholders, but yet if they are well-intentioned and aligned to the same goals, they can actually sustain that effort over time and garner the attention the program needs from authorities as well. We've seen that on the ground.
Thanks, yeah. They bring that thread that runs through as you think about scaling that particular program. Thanks, I think we're out of time, but thank you, Simon, and thank you, Nadia, for your questions, and thank you to my panelists. I hope the discussion was interesting. Thank you for joining from the UK and from India.
Thanks a lot.